No, it's okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Welcome to the last session in this room, which is entitled Bottom-Up Solutions in Energy Communities. There's a parallel session in the COMET Universal that is titled Bridging Infrastructure Gaps for Renewables Powered Systems, just to ensure that you're in the right room. The main objective of this session is to provide participants with a comprehensive understanding of how energy communities function, different models and benefits they can bring for the energy transition globally and locally. During this session, we are going to have two scene-setting presentations, which will be followed by a panel discussion. For the first scene presentations from IRENA, I would like to introduce Arina Anisie, Analyst from IRENA. IRENA is an analyst on renewable energy innovation and at International Renewable Energy Agency since the year 2017. She supports the innovation work streams in IRENA and is the main author of the IRENA Innovation Landscape Reports. Arina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nolwazi, for the introduction, and thanks for being here with us. This is the last session of the day. And I'm very excited to set the scene for this session of a topic very close to my heart, bottom-up solution energy communities. And I also want to thank the World Wind Energy Association, especially Stefan, who helped with co-organizing this session. So it's about bottom-up solution, but I will start with a very top-down overview of the energy transition. And this graph here just shows where we are or were in 2020 and where we need to be in 2050 in terms of final energy consumption and what drives the energy transition. And we see that renewable energy deployment is at the core of the energy transition. Energy efficiency and the electrification of end-use sectors contribute massively to this shift. And actually, the total energy final consumption decreases due to energy efficiency, but the renewables need to increase from 28% today to 91%. So much more renewables is needed. good news is that renewable indeed is leading global capacity growth at a record pace. Here are some graphs that shows increase in renewable capacity in the last years compared to increase in non-renewable capacity. But again, much more renewable capacity is needed. Here it's at the bottom, you will see that according to the pledge that was done in COP28 to triple up renewables and double down energy efficiency, we need to, today we have 26% of total installed capacity of renewables, and we need to increase to 62% by 2030. So again, we need to accelerate the deployment of renewables. But today I don't want to talk necessarily to the lens of the climate goals, because energy transition can go beyond climate goals, and energy transition can drive sustainable growth. And this transition presents enormous opportunities to transform and modernize energy systems across the globe. All regions have much to gain from these transitions, making it possible to create a resilient, secure, and affordable low-carbon energy system and provide universal access to electricity. It is a huge opportunity in front of us that we need to take advantage of in creating sustainable growth. The development of renewables can be a catalyst for ensuring a fair, just, efficient, and equitable transition for all, making, moreover, powering sustainable economic development. Here we identify 5 priorities for policymakers to create an enabling environment for innovations and bottom-up solutions to flourish. And these are having a clear vision. Energy transition roadmap can provide predictability and stability for innovators. Incentivize value creation locally, develop local industry, develop value supply chains and skills, increase ownership, design participatory processes, decision-making processes, bring everybody on board. Of course, finance the transition, affordable access to finance, innovative funding models, it's a big topic for policymakers. And last but not least, collaboration, especially focusing on South-South collaboration and regional cooperation to find synergies between countries and regions with similar challenges. We have been working for the past 7 years in IRENA with the concept of systemic innovation, which we define as the fact that innovation should go beyond technology. Many people think about innovation, think about technology, but innovation should go beyond technology. And we need to innovate also in business models, in markets design, and how we regulate the power system, and how we plan and operate the power system. And only innovating in this 4 dimension, we can actually see on-the-ground solution happening and implemented successfully. So this is what we call at IRENA systemic innovation. We have been publishing so far 2 reports on innovation landscape. This innovation landscape reports provide innovation toolbox in this 4 dimension, maps innovation in technology, business models, market design, and system operation and planning to help policymakers build their tailor-made solution, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution, but this is kind of a toolbox that helps policymakers pick and choose what innovations work best for them and have their own tailor-made solution. So just to briefly introduce you on our work on innovation, we had a first report that focused on solutions to increase flexibility in power systems. Then we had a second report with toolboxes to have solutions for smart electrification of end-use sectors. And right now, we are in the process of finalizing the third toolbox innovations that it's focused to achieve solutions to achieve sustainable growth powered by renewables. And this session and this conference, especially this track, it's very much designed to inform this report. So the discussions and the findings for this discussion will go in the main findings on the report, which will be published later this year in autumn. This is just an overview of a preliminary presentation of what we have so much in this report as in terms of toolbox. What do we mean by sustainable development powered by renewables? We designed this toolbox to build solutions for resilient power systems. And this you can see, for example, the list of innovations, and another toolbox for rural development through decentralized productive uses. And you can see most of the innovations are in technology and business models because they are bottom-up solutions. We have energy community here as one of the innovations. But what I want to emphasize is that in reality, an energy community project that works well on the ground involves not only innovation in business models, but it also has to have technology, mini-grids, small-scale batteries, digitalization, we will see how important it is, and also, to be financed, like crowdfunding on pay-as-you-go, to have a peer-to-peer trading. So there are many innovations that come together to build actually a solution that is successful on the ground. And if this mini-grid and community is connected to the grid, also it's important to have regulations for the mini-grids and on the planning side to harmonize grid and off-grid development from the government side. I will not talk too much about the energy communities because we have excellent speakers and panelists that will debunk what is it and how it works. So I will not attempt to do that. I just want to say that the energy community model in principle aims to empower community. You have a shared ownership and you share the benefits of the community, of the project, both social benefits, economic benefits, and also environmental benefits. There is this study that it was released a few years ago, I think last year, by Arina Coalition for Action. Actually was work led by Stefan, who will moderate the panel. And we also did some work here in Bonn in ITC on energy communities to see how they are advancing the energy transition from a bit more technical point of view and how they can advance more the deployment of renewables in communities, but also when connected to the grid, what is the potential to increase grid flexibility and to provide flexibility, grid resilience, and to provide flexibility to the grid. One of the main enabling factors for having such projects more developed is access to finance, it's capacity building within community, and of course policy and regulatory frameworks, but I'm sure our panelists will explain more and will share more about this. I will close with this slide summarizing a little bit the fact that innovative bottom-up solution can drive sustainable growth, but they also need an enabling environment that they can operate. So it's kind of a two-way street. Both top-down solution and bottom-up solution are needed for having a successful energy transition and really seeing more projects on the ground flourishing. I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arina, for the wonderful presentation. Before I call Ayu on stage, I'd like to mention that this session is organized in partnership with the World Wind Energy Association and supported by the IRENA Coalition for Action. And I would also like to encourage the audience to post their question using the Slido code over there. And please make sure that you select the green track, which is the bottom-up solutions. And now I'd like to call Ayu Abdullah on stage. Ayu is a co-founder and managing director of COMET, which is Community Energy Toolkit, a participatory software platform that facilitates community engagement, demand assessment, and energy planning for mini-grids and decentralized energy system. She also serves as the executive director at Energy Action Partners, an international non-profit organization focused on capacity building and community-driven energy access solutions. You may take the floor.
I'm shorter. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's such an honor to be able to scene set for this session for a topic that's so close to my heart and is really why I do the things that I do. So my name is Ayu Abdullah. I'm usually based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I'm actually going to be wearing two hats today. One is the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization called Energy Action Partners. And we are just over 10 years old, and we work in the space of energy access. We primarily work in Southeast Asia, but we've also have had experience in South Asia, East Africa, and the Pacific as well. I'm also managing director of COMET, which is a spin-off startup from Energy Action Partners, and you'll see what that means in a little bit. But basically, for today's presentation and scene setting, I would like to really walk everyone through our journey and the work that we do in community energy. And so I wanted to start with a little bit of a challenge in that when we think of community energy, and because we primarily work in an energy access context, so a lot of it is off-grid, what usually gets prioritized or dominant priorities when we think about off-grid systems is usually the technology. We think about tariffs making it viable from a business perspective. We think about what kind of technologies are appropriate for communities. We think about delivery models, business models, and all of these are extremely relevant and needed and required, but it's insufficient. And we know after many years, many decades of deploying off-grid systems, that it is insufficient because at the very core, the critical success factor is not all these things. It's actually the community and their participation, their engagement, their ownership of the system. And I think we all know this. And this is, increasingly becoming discussed at conferences and forums such as this, which is why this session, I think, is extremely exciting to be a part of. But what does that mean, really, when we think about community engagement and participation, and how does that look in practice? So I like to think about community engagement and participation as there is a spectrum. And we can go from light touch to basically, just thinking about it being, it can be a very one-way transaction where, it's consultation, we're getting information from communities, and this is usually used when we're trying to design systems, and we want to know what kind of systems, where to place them, how big should the systems be, how much energy should we generate. But it's at the bottom because it's really one way in the sense that the control is not with the community. And then if you increase it to a next level, it becomes more two-way. A lot of it is capacity building and training. We're learning from the community. They're learning from us as well as an external party coming in to co-develop and co-implement the system together. And so there's some control from the community, some sharing of power and decision making. But really at the what I consider to be the highest level of community engagement is where it is complete ownership. Self-mobilization, ownership of the system is with the community, and all control and decision-making is with them. And so you can kind of think of a spectrum, and if you've been part of different projects, you can kind of try to think about where your project falls on in this spectrum. But we have seen from experience that effective community engagement not just makes a difference in terms of reducing costs and more efficient, effective implementation of the technology, but it also means more alignment with communities' aspirations and expectations. And what this means is then you start to really activate a lot of the outcomes that we want to see with electrification. Right? When we think about energy and electrification, we think about development, progress, but all of that does not happen on its own, and it needs community engagement. So we tend to think at our organizations, we tend to think of community engagement being absolutely necessary and required throughout the project lifecycle and development. And we think about the typical process of projects and implementing, and that there is potential and scope for community engagement to be a part of every single process. And it's not easy. It can be time intensive, it can be resource intensive, which is probably my guess why some people don't do it, or that you tend to fall back to kind of the lower level of community engagement. But we know by now that when we're talking about especially community energy in a location that is far from cities, far from resources, it's absolutely necessary that the community be part of the system and that, community engagement and participation becomes the system's foundation. So just some examples from our work, and I'm choosing some work in Malaysia. We've had, as our nonprofit ENACT has had several recent projects in about 4 communities. This is about, I would say, 5 hours north of Kuala Lumpur. And I know that it's an extremely difficult thing to imagine considering our Petronas Twin Towers, but trust me, they're there. I'm not kidding. And that there's a very stark contrast between our cities and our rural areas, which are still in rainforests and with indigenous communities. So we have about still, Malaysia claims that we are 99-point-something% electrified, but we actually do have pockets of communities that are and under electrified, and a lot of them are not counted in the census because they're from indigenous communities. And so we operate in this part of the state of Pahang, which is the center of West Malaysia. And in these communities, in total, about 4 communities, about 600 people, that roughly translates to about 80 houses. The communities, we've been with them from the beginning. We have co-designed it, so at every step of the way, we involve some form of community engagement activity in different formats. And so we do social mapping. If you're an anthropologist, you might be familiar with that. We do a lot of participatory design, and we use our software COMET, which I will share more about in the next slide. But basically, the community has taken ownership over the project development. And we've helped to set up village energy committees in the communities which have taken over governance of the systems. We also provide technical training to make sure that they can maintain and operate, and the only thing they need to call us for is really replacement parts at the end of the lifetime of a system. And this is actually explicitly what we tell them. Please don't call us for anything else. One of the communities is the first Malaysian site to be signed up for DREC, so we're very excited about that, and we think that it can be a great model to generate some revenue for the community. To offset some of the maintenance and operations. We're testing out new combinations of technologies. So these communities are small and dispersed, so mini grids might actually be quite costly. So we're trying out what we call clustered solar rooftop systems. We're not calling them solar home systems because we want to differentiate them from the plug and play. But we're calling them rooftop systems also because we are being creative in that it is not a mini-grid system, which then requires a whole set of new regulations, and we are doing it slightly differently. We're also providing business and enterprise development support. So through our engagement activities, we identify new enterprises and ideas that the community is interested in, and then the next stage of the project will actually be to work with them through how to set up these businesses and get some form of financial support from local banks in terms of small loans or microloans. So it's an extremely exciting project, which we've really used all of the experience that we've learned, in the past 10 years of our organization being around. But our co-founding team also has over 20 years of experience. And so these projects have really capitalized on all of that experience in terms of community engagement and ownership. So how we've been able to turn some of that experience into a tool and approach that we'd like other organizations to also use and learn from is we identified very early on, maybe about in 2017, that it can be very time intensive doing community engagement, but how do we then make sure that projects still have community engagement as part of its process? So we came up with a simulation tool where basically we go into communities and we run community workshops using the simulation tool. So basically, you set up a virtual mini-grid or a decentralized energy system, and we run these workshops where the community walks through a scenario of this is what it would be like to have a mini-grid system, and this is how much it's going to cost me. And through these workshops, we tackle different topics and issues that normally arise when we're trying to develop projects, things like demand profiles, projections, tariff setting, how do you resolve conflict in sharing, a resource like a mini-grid system. And basically what you get out of these simulations is you get load profiles that you can then use for your system design. And they're based on very specific scenarios and expectations of the community. So you get very nuanced information in terms of what that system can look like. So this to us is community engagement in practice. It's using a digital tool, but it's not removing the human interaction, right? The tool is meant to amplify the outcomes that you get of community engagement. But because it's a digital tool, you can basically use it in many different contexts. So we've actually, as of last week, we've used it in over 110 communities, no longer 106. And we've used it in many different contexts, in East Africa, in Nepal, in Myanmar, in Southeast Asia, Fiji, and the most recent deployments were actually with the Hopi tribe in Arizona in the US, which is extremely exciting for us to be using it in a very different context than we ever imagined. But apparently there's still over 30,000 connections unelectrified in that reservation. So that's some of our experience and journey. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion that we're going to have. But basically, my call to action or my call to all of you is to rethink what community energy means and to think about how to innovate not just technology, not just business models, but also in terms of can we do engagement differently? And can we do it on the demand side rather than on the supply side? And so with that, I end my presentation and thank you very much.
With that, we'll move on to our panel discussion. The panel discussions will bring different perspectives on energy communities from around the globe, including Malaysia, India, China, Colombia, and Africa. I'd like to call Stefan Gsänger, Secretary General of World Wind Energy Association. Stefan has managed the World Wind Energy Association since the foundation in 2001. Under his direction, he has become the voice of the wind sector worldwide with members in more than 100 countries. WWEA attained special consultative status at the UN and has been leading the working group on energy communities within IRENA Coalition for Action. He will also introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for arranging this session. I think this is a really extremely important topic, and more people are becoming aware of the importance of engaging the people, engaging communities. It's my pleasure that we really have many people here. So let me invite now our panelists to join us here. The first, of course, are you. If you please come, I think you've already been introduced. From Malaysia. Then we have Simbini from the AUDA NEPAD, based in South Africa, as I've learned. Then we have Manoj Gupta, who is the CEO of Tata Power Renewable Microgrids. And we have Vega, who works for the Stockholm Environmental Institute, but that might sound a bit misleading because you're based in Bogota as a researcher, so you're working from Latin America. And last but certainly not least, we have our colleague from China, Mr. Peng, who is principal staff of the Energy Bureau of the government of Qinghai, province of Qinghai in China. So as you see, we have really a very diverse panel also here from, all the continents are represented, aside from Australia, but I think you have noticed that the focus of this session is going to be more on the, what is called South or so-called developing country perspective. I think that is a very important one, especially when it comes to community energy. Now, let us start this discussion, and I think most of you have already noticed that we're using two terms here. One is community energy, and the other one is energy community. At IRENA, as we started, as has been mentioned many years ago, a working group within the Coalition for Action with the name of Community Energy Working Group. Now, we also know that, of course, in some parts of the world, in particular in the European Union, there's a lot of, it's not only discussion, but there is legislation about energy communities. So let's talk a little bit about what all this means. Let me just start by suggesting, and I would like to hear what you think about that, while the energy community can be the entity, which would be by European legislation, which can do community energy, sharing of energy. Community energy is a principle. We defined at IRENA some years ago, one of the first white papers that we published, community energy with 3 principles. That's not exactly yet a kind of legal definition, but that there must be ownership by the local community, there must be control, decision-making must lie with the local community, and the profit must stay with the local community. The majority, of course, there can always be some. So that is what we thought. That these are the important criteria. Now, I would just like to hear what your opinions are. How do you, maybe start with you, Ayu. You've already mentioned a bit in your presentation. How do you understand community energy? And do you agree with that community energy community? Suggestion.
Yeah, so I've definitely talked a lot about that just now, but I guess for me, I tend to think of community energy as you do in terms of it's a concept or a principle, and you mentioned the 3: ownership, sharing of benefits and profit, and the third one was decision making, right? And so I agree with that. From my perspective, community energy is definitely when the community has ownership over the system and the process, has control in decision making, and then definitely benefits are for the community primarily. I think the only thing I would add to that is that in my context of working in the energy access space, what I would add to that is that unlike in more developed countries where you're working within an environment where structures are already set up for things like that to happen, but in developing areas or in the off-grid space, we have to actually create these structures and embed the ownership and the agency within those structures. And so that's a kind of an added dimension to it when we think about the work that we do in community energy. And so for us, it's really about ensuring that the community has agency over the process for their own benefits and value.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important also from your personal perspective, to add what you find in particular important. Now, Simbini, you are, of course, I think representing here more or less a whole continent. So probably there's also not just one answer for whole Africa. But what's your also with your experience working with the different countries in Africa? First, maybe more that general statement. Do you agree? Do you think there's something missing, or what's your take?
I think definitely that I think there is something really missing. If you look at the fact that there are about 600 million people without electricity, access to electricity on the continent, so it's then shows you that there is something really missing. But as AUDA NEPAD, and we've been working with IRENA, has been mentioned in the morning that we have been working on the Africa Single Electricity Market and the Continental Power Systems Master Plan. So from this discussion, within the perspective of this discussion, we are looking at the concept of energy communities from two levels. First, communities at regional level, where we create communities where member states can trade power within different regional economic communities. And then the second level is where we then go down now to the off-grid systems. Because even though we work with the regional power pools to create these interconnected national grids, but then there's going to be a role for off-grid systems. And for those who attended the plenary in the morning, the Commissioner of Energy from ECOWAS mentioned that, Africa has set up rural electrification agencies. And yet, even though we have electrified or constructed grids to communities to provide power to them, they're still not viable because in some cases they don't afford the power. And also if you look at the solar home systems and the mini grids that we've also been constructing over the years, they still have been suffering from the same problem of affordability from the communities. So as AUDA, we are saying that let's change those assumptions. Now that we are talking about the just energy transition, we want to make sure that no one is left behind. There is a real opportunity for us to start creating those energy communities for those off-grid communities so that they can actually form those communities and be able to participate in the broader socio-economic development by producing power, by becoming prosumers, as Manoj mentioned, and assuming that power has to flow bidirectionally from the national grid to the community, but also from the community back into the grid. And that way we can then start to explore models that can actually transform the lives of these energy communities that we are talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for introducing the perspective that we also need to talk about today, and that is what's the role and why do we need these energy communities or follow community energy principles. Now we have Manoj Gupta, the CEO of Tata,
Microgrid,
which is actually a big company. So you're working with those communities. What's your experience now? I assume you're mainly working with India as an Indian company.
Yeah.
What's your experience now working with communities in India? Is there such kind of degree that you can work with them, that they really can act in the way that we maybe ideally already assume? Or do you need to train them, educate them?
Yeah, just wanted to add a standard definition. There are two components which I'd add, maybe three. One is this solution has to be, energy community has to be localized to that geography, which normally would be sort of a difficult terrain to be. Number two, the focus has to be on the renewable, because traditional grids will not suffice those requirements. And third is, while ownership comes, control comes, the safety aspect are to be brought into the regulation because you're dealing with live electrical equipments. So this piece is probably missed out because consequences are too high. While making that possibility is through your skill development programs, wherein we engage the local community, identify people with entrepreneurship, and flair for the technology. You train them, and they will then operate and maintain the distribution renewable energy systems. And while we say the energy, traditionally we talk about electricity, but we also talk about thermal energy, which could be, again, today traditionally if you see the people use coal, wood as natural resources being utilized over there. Can we replace that with agri-based solutions which still needs, I think they can work the thermal energy or the electrical energy. For example, in India, we are working on biogas system or a biomethane system, which will help us to take care of both thermal requirement as electrical requirement. And the solar being the main source, it's free, available for at least 4 to 6 hours in a day. That way we are looking at. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's worthwhile indeed to underline that we're not only focusing on electricity indeed, So an energy community or community energy can be any kind of
Yeah. In fact, one component which normally gets mixed out is the water, because we normally use water, but we leave out for consuming that water, a lot of energy gets wasted at work. So the electric supply to pump that water, the pump's efficiency into pumping it back is normally missed out. So probably if you can add that into the equation, then it's complete full-fledged solution to it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's another important aspect when we talk about water supply. And one aspect I think we should already also bear in mind, what you mentioned is the training education. You refer to that it's part of your programs as well. So that's something I think we should come back to as well. But let's ask Jose Vega from Colombia. We just talked about before the session started. You said that in Colombia, you see that there is between, the distribution of wealth is not very equal. So that's where you see there is an importance of community energy. So do you otherwise agree that community energy, that it has that kind of empowerment component, which is part of the definition that we've been using so far, decision making?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, and thanks, Arina, for inviting me to be part of this panel. And yes, the concept of energy communities has taken off in Colombia. There is a regulatory framework about it. And I think the key aspect of them is the associativity aspect, right? There is a community that's organized around a legal figure of an association or cooperative, and that gives them, the legal aspect of being an energy community. That's a key thing to bear in mind. So they, through this figure, are able to generate, commercialize, and efficiently use electricity from renewable energy sources, mainly solar and bioenergy. We haven't seen pilots, for instance, on wind energy. We're very much looking forward to working on that. And I would say there are two sort of approaches to energy communities. Those that are, as you mentioned in your presentation, those are bottom-up, and those are more top-down, right? And then I guess I would say the definition of energy community should be also discussed from a bottom-up approach, in which communities are able to say what they think of the definition and whether what sort of energy is going to be used through that definition as well. So to come back to the point on Colombia enacting this framework, the goal is having 20,000 energy communities by 2026. And right now there are like 480 pilots of energy communities, which is an ambitious target. There's 1 year to achieve it. So we'll see. And the funding, your question on funding is also important, because so far the funding has been public funding from the national government, national budget. So incorporating new ways of funding these energy communities will be important in the coming future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Then let's now look into China. China is also supporting community energy and has some legislation also on the national level. Though, Mr. Peng, you are representing here the province of Qinghai. Could you explain what your government is doing to support that kind of community energy? I heard that there are some activities in your province in particular. Would you like to describe us what you've been doing?
Hello everyone, I'm Zhang Peng, a government official from the Energy Bureau of Qinghai province. In Qinghai, China, an energy community is a grassroots government until certain on village goal or on village collectives and renewable energy. With the core goal of achieving sharing the assets, sharing the benefits, and sharing the governments through clean energy development. Key elements include community ownership. Village collectives hold property rights to power stations. In Qinghai, 1,622 villages joined operating 417 kilowatt solar plants, transforming farmers from energy consumers to stakeholders. Multifunctional design in high altitude, sparsely populated area. Microgrids address power shortages while generating annual revenues of 517 million RMB to support 283,000 property-stricken people. In eco-synergy, over 19% of projectors are located in deserts to increasing vegetation coverage by 13% and fix 15,000 tons of sand every year. Balancing poverty, innovation, and encounter protection. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is really impressive to hear that from China. And I know that many didn't expect that there's already such a detailed legislation. It's, by the way, we are at the Community Energy Working Group at IRENA at the moment gathering legislation about community energy or community engagement. So if anybody here like this, we should certainly come back to you. Please let us know, because we want to have a collection of what governments are doing at this point of time, whether it's local, whether it's like in your case province, or whether it's national, or in the case of Europe, of course, European as well. Now, I would like to hear from you maybe a little bit more what you are doing. And then, forgive me, Ayu, we heard from you already. Let's, this case, start with Simbini. You are as an, it's a bit like similar to, it's a continental organization. Have you already any programs that are supporting community energy?
No, definitely. We are working on one. And in this, what we want to pilot is that is targeting mainly communities that are off-grid. And because of the nature of our organization, we have to be very specific. We are going to be very specific in terms of the area that we are going to focus on. We are not going to be focusing on solar home systems, because there are a lot of players that are looking at that. We are also not going to be looking at mini grids, because there are also other players that are better suited to look at that. But we are looking at those communities that have benefited from rural electrification programs, where there is existing transmission infrastructure. And we know that it has costed a lot for governments to fund these transmission infrastructure, but the demand at the end of that transmission infrastructure is very low. So we are saying that let's reverse the assumption. Let's allow power to flow from the community back into the national grid by promoting energy communities where we work with the private sector and governments, the governments providing the necessary policy and legal framework for investments to take place in these communities. And also the private sector coming in with the technical expertise to run and manage these large-scale microgrids, which feed back into the national grid. And of course, to be able to do that, we need to co-design that with the community and design financing mechanisms that address some of the currency risk associated with power development on the continent. And we want to pilot a way where we can then use local bonds, where communities can actually participate and buy these bonds to co-own these energy systems and invest in these energy systems, so that the revenue that is generated from that is they can get part of the dividends from the sale of the power. And in terms of their source of income, we want to design them in so that it's applicable to their context in terms of their perception of wealth, to the extent that we want to see if they can actually buy these bonds by selling their cow or their chicken, because this is what they have, so that there is that community ownership. And we borrowed that from the way the Botswana government, for example, built the University of Botswana, they allowed each household to contribute a cow towards building the University of Botswana. And I think something that has been used and it was successful in building a university, and surely it can be replicated to be able to, for a community energy system. But for it to work now, there are certain mechanisms that we also need to work with the government. For example, we need to make sure that we can create an energy exchange where these communities can actually be able to say, using predictive models, where we can predict the power generation that will be generated on that system, can then be able to trade their power on that national energy exchange, and be able to, for the dispatch, the transmission operator to be able to give preference to dispatch from these power systems. So we are still at concept stage, and we are mobilizing funds. We have so far partnered with a private entity in Tanzania. They want to set up something similar that is targeting for supplying power to a gold mine. And we are also exploring other countries where we can then be able to pilot this. And we invite those in the room who may be interested to partner with us to come and partner with us on this one. Thank you.
So you do the actual really work on the ground as well. And it's very interesting you speak about kind of business models that you actually then need to obviously tailor-make for each project. I remember in Pakistan, I like very much this project was called Goats for Water. So also that kind of implement, instead of paying with money, paying with some products that the people. So that's something that you are doing? And what's actually my question, what do you see, maybe now brief at the moment, as a main barrier? Can you say that as one general problem, or?
I think it's many problems. I think Ms. Taylor mentioned that in the morning, that for Africa, my personal perspective is that our focus has been misplaced. We have been saying that our target is access, but you're providing access to a community that cannot afford that power. And our goal should actually be productive use, so that you can employ these communities, empower them so that they can afford the power. And by using these models, that's the beginning of empowering them, because we are saying that they have a resource which is free, which is the sun, and they can use that now to generate income and create employment. But once you have that energy infrastructure within the community, you can then attract other downstream industries to be able to come and invest in those communities, because you then have a power being readily available in those communities. And in that way, you are creating a system where you can then now have broad-based socio-economic development. And once you create employment for these communities, they can then be able to access power, they can afford it, and you can then start to stimulate demand within the communities. So, and of course, the issues about financing, the business models, all of those still need to be addressed. And this is why we're saying, let's partner and pilot and use different models. And from the lessons that we'll learn from that, we can then come up with a model that we can then be able to replicate across the continent.
I think a key word, and I believe there's a special session for that, is the productive use of energy. That's certainly something that we should think of when we talk about business models. Obviously, people need to be able to generate more income. Now, again, going to Manoj Gupta, you have experience, and Tata is a commercial company, so when you do this, you must have a clear business strategy. Can you explain how you do this?
So we have two models to work upon. One is unelectrified areas where is no electricity existing, and the second is where the electricity exists, underserved area where reliability is an issue, quality is an issue. So where underserved areas where we have a commercial model where we provide supply reliability, quality of supply, and then restoration supply is one of the focus area. On top of it, entrepreneurship development is the game for us, which changes this whole equation. What we have seen is because of unreliable supply, the regular rural customers depends on alternate source of energy, be the kerosene, be the diesel, which are costly fuels apart from pollution and other things. Now, for them, we set up microgrid and have a parallel network with the DISCOM being operating there. And what we say is that we are complementing government's initiative to provide end supply to a customer. So in a typical rural India, a customer would have two switches, one connecting primarily to the national grid, and the second switch is from microgrid. So they switch on the power supply to have supply when they need, because the discom supply is unreliable in those remote areas. So that's one model, and we say that if a micro enterprise has to depend on diesel set, cost of its production, the goods being sold are much higher. And with this interventions, the production cost goes down. And we have seen in that market, the guy who has microgrid supply as a secondary supply attracts more customer. And this is first time I've seen in rural India that because of availability of reliable supply, the business goes up. And he has dropped his price of production and more customer comes in. So that's one set of the engagement. The second set of engagement is about unelectrified area. And in past, through government interventions, home lighting system was set up, which was basically a DC system. And one thing which lagged about that after 3 years or 4 years, the whole system collapsed. Primary reason, there was nobody to operate and maintain the plant. Know-how of the technology, how to maintain the batteries, what health checkups to be done. Now, these systems, we are expecting national grid to get connected. And for what type of load? There is no electricity, and if minimum electricity is also there, they consume 100 watt, 200 watt. And assuming they have 100 homes over there, 20 kilowatt. And if you want to extend national grid for 20 kilowatt of power supply, the cost of extending that network and passing through the difficult terrain is very, very high. And hence it becomes unviable for the discom as well as for the customer. The solution lies over there is to have a microgrid, and which is operated on a profitable base model with community engagement in place. But only one difference is that what we have done differently is deploying the natural local resources, which is very natural to happen. But we have partnered him into success. We call it partner in success because he is part of a revenue model. Suppose 100 rupees of electricity is generated, he gets X percentage of as a revenue to him. So there is an incentive for this guy to operate and maintain the system in healthy condition. And also for the community, it's beneficial because you get a reliable power supply and a quality supply for them. So that's the way we have done. Community-based microgrids are growing. One of the challenge which I feel going forward will be the safety aspect, because these are the guys who have never seen electricity. And threat of electricity is really not known to them. And the second thing is what productive use, as he rightly said, electricity can be utilized for income generation. They probably don't have a clue. So one of the success factor over here is how can I link the agri-based business, agri-based produce, processing plant using the electricity. That could make a game change for the local community. And lastly, using this agri-waste into biogas generation, which can go for a clean cooking, or through gas generator, you produce electricity. So that model will probably work the best with solar in the daytime, and off solar time, you have biogas. That way you create a circular economy. And on top of with this ecosystem, you develop digital technology, because all these systems are in remote areas. So, and all controls will happen on a communication system, be the internet, be the SAT systems. Now, these systems are to be reinforced, and then digital payment should happen, because it's least cost model. So you cannot have people going collecting money. So digital payment is one thing. Number two, the technology remotely controlled. And the technology also, cost of that technology has to be very small. For a 10 kilowatt of, for 100 watt of energy consumption, how much is the cost of meter? So you need to have a very dedicated, low cost, reliable meter which can measure those energies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you've already even referred to some of those questions which were now coming in. But let's go through the our panelists, and then we refer to the questions which are coming in. Very interesting questions here as well. But Jose, I wanted to ask you, before you spoke in your first statement more about kind of the general situation in Colombia, what's the practical kind of situation at the moment? You are certainly aware of communities that have become energy communities. what are their practical challenges that they see? Is that working well, smoothly, or how is it working in Colombia?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just say first that yes, I come from the Stockholm Environment Institute, but there is a regional office in Colombia for the institute. So we are based also in Colombia, while it seems we are just in Stockholm. So just a small clarification. And there are other centers around the world anyway. So so SEI in Colombia has a long track record of engaging and supporting and working alongside local communities. And something that we've learned in this process is that a profound change in the narrative around renewables is needed. Local communities might be well aware of climate change, but I think the narrative of climate change around renewables is not enough. When a developer arrives at a community saying, we need to reduce CO2 emissions or meet the 1.5 target or the Paris Agreement and all that, I'm not saying it's not relevant. It's of course relevant, but for a local community, what they really want to know is how does it impact the local development for them? What sort of benefit, impacts does the project, have with it? So that's one thing. And then what we do is, we need to build capacities then at the local level so that this narrative change can happen and communities can better understand the implications of projects. So we co-developed with local communities, indigenous communities in Colombia, a training program based on what they were willing to learn, right? So what topics do you think are relevant in this context that you're facing with many developers arriving at your place? And then they choose many, many topics. There's a long list, but one of them was energy communities. The government has been pushing through this narrative a lot and strongly, but there's a lack of socialization. What do we mean by this? How can a community become an energy community, and so on and so forth? The other thing here on building local capacities is not only building capacities for them to participate as employees of companies, but also for them to build their own company or energy community. And beyond that, there are capacities needed for them to actively negotiate the benefits of large-scale renewable energy projects. What we have in Colombia is a context in which a large company is facing negotiation with a community without a referee, that there's no referee or intermediary. So what you end up seeing is a scenario in which the company is trying to make the most of the negotiation, while the community is also trying to make the most with very few capacities like the company has. A key part of this training program that we're implementing is the exchange of experiences and learnings. So we've been connecting communities across the region, Colombia, so that they can learn to each other. You have an energy community in this community. Let's visit it. Let's see how it works. What does it imply? What's the governance model of it? Who invested to have this? What's the role of women? Because there's a gender perspective that needs to be included as well. So that has been our approach. We've seen a government active in terms of regulation, in terms of ambitious targets. But at the same time, if you quick Google search energy communities in Europe, you will see that there are 9,000 or something like that. So the goal in Colombia is 20,000 for 2026. So that's cool. Let's be ambitious, but are we gonna actually make it? And how that target was discussed and with who, those are key questions. But again, the political will is there, and we look forward to support the initiative at the national level as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think training, that's again a key word that comes from you. And what I believe what we need to do, and I'm glad we are here, I think we're part of this mainstreaming community energy and the solutions which are there. So let's discuss now maybe a little bit more about the policy side, and there's also some questions related to that. But Mr. Peng, I have a question for you. How is the province government supporting community participation and benefit sharing in large scale renewable energy projects?
Over the past decade, under the guidance of the National Energy Administrations, Qinghai province has worked hard to building energy communities and several key experience have been gained. Was one, property rights reform, powering up community groups in Qinghai, as mentioned earlier, 1,622 villages joined operating 470 kilowatts photovoltaic power station with villager conglomerates holding property rights and villages sharing the benefits of solar. Power generation. For example, 120 villages in Haidong City, Qinghai Province, have formed a joint village-based photovoltaic power station. The annual revenue over 320,000 yuan is used for public services, which has boosted villages in source enzyme for community-based management. In Huangnan Provincial, Qinghai Province, the village connected raising its yearly income by 250,000 yuan by using money from rooftop solar power to start the pastoral canal guest house. Over 100 villages become guest house manager, turning solar become into industry profits. The two regional innovation, creating a new way of working together across areas. Qinghai has developed a new plan called the Spatial Energy Cooperation Zone. This plan helps fix the problem of uneven resource distribution in different regions. A 10,000 kilowatt solar power station has built in Haixi. In Haixi Prefecture, Qinghai Province, where there is a lot of sunlight. The money it makes is used to help Maduo country in Guoluo Province in Qinghai Province. Maduo is 400 kilometers away and doesn't get much sunlight because it's very high up. This project makes 5.3 million yuan every year and helps 100 and helps 1,144 elder families. This is why our generating power in one place and helping another place brings clean energy to forever granted areas. It also offers a new answer to the energy problem in high altitude regions. 3. Energy for ecology first. A double win of earning more and stopping desert sprint with a solar power station in Qinghai. When building energy communities, protecting nature comes first. More than 19% of these projects are set up in the desert and by using the wires of COMET farming with solar power and COMET heating with solar power. There is 13% more plant growth under the solar panels. This can hold back 15,000 tons of sand each year. So it reaches two goals: using solar power to stop desert growth and making more money for a better environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very broad program that you're even doing. Now let's look into other countries as well, what you're doing. And now, as you are not working only in one country, looking at this question came up several times. What kind of policies do you think will be helpful to support that kind of work that you're doing? Or maybe you can also put it the other way around. Where do you see that the policies are not supportive enough?
I'm going to get to that question, but I also, after hearing from all my colleagues, I wanted to pull on a thread that I started, kind of noticed was coming up again and again. And I think that this would actually help to give some context to my answer as well. So one thing I noticed was, you mentioned narratives are very important. You mentioned productive use when you're thinking of community energy and how to design effective community energy that really sort of gets at the outcomes that we want, right? And I wanted to also, I guess, add on or pull on the thread in a slightly different direction that when we do our projects with our organization, we start with the overall goal, actually, of and think about what is the end. And the overall goal really is more of how do we help and support communities in building their capabilities to meet their development outcomes as defined by them. And I think that when you set a different narrative or when you set a different goal, it starts to show in how you design and develop your projects, right? Because that actually becomes sort of your end. And then everything else before that just becomes a means to the end, right? So I know that this may sound a little bit roundabout, but basically what I'm saying is that when we think about energy, we actually think of it as a means to an end. And energy becomes the platform through which communities can build their institutions, build their development goals, and then meet them through the energy system. And I think that and I was just thinking as I was hearing this, that it's very important. And at a project level, that's what we think of. But when we think about at a higher level, you're absolutely right. Narratives are very important. And narratives, when you think about policy and all of that, right, setting the right narrative guides the policy. And setting the right policies will also guide funding, right, towards the kind of work that we do. So it becomes very critical to think, first of all, what is the narrative that we're setting in terms of what are we really trying to achieve? Our nonprofit organization does some policy advocacy and regulatory reform in Malaysia, specifically for a mini-grid program in the state of Sabah, which is the most under-electrified state and the state with the highest poverty rates in Malaysia. So it's on the island of Borneo, it's far east. It's closer to the Philippines than it is to Kuala Lumpur, to be honest. And so it's quite far from our administrative capital, right? And so the narrative and the policies, when it's happening at our administrative capital, is that we're almost 100% electrified. Grid extension, we've been using grid extension for rural electrification for many, many years. It works, and this is the narrative across Southeast Asia. The narrative is that there's no energy access problem. And that if there were, rural electrification should be done through grid extension. So in sort of arguing against this policy, we first need to correct the narrative, or set a new narrative would be a different way to do it. And our work at Energy Action Partners for Southeast Asia and as well as the Pacific region, because we feel a lot of similarities and solidarity to our Pacific Island, sisters and brothers, more so than I think to South Asia, which is a very different context, to be honest, is that we first need to set the narrative that energy access still is a problem in this region, but that it looks different than, say, in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Because the numbers are different, obviously. So the urgency is slightly different, right? So in the Southeast Asia Pacific region, we have about 70 million people unelectrified, but 350 million people under-electrified, still without reliable access to energy, right? So we need to fix that narrative first of all. And we think that a good way to do it is to actually fit it within current policy and priorities of government in the region, which is more of an energy transition, climate resilience, sort of focus areas, rather than just purely an energy access issue. So this is kind of one way to reset that narrative. And then we think that that would help the policies, because governments, first of all, need to understand what the actual problem is, need to fit it within their current agendas and priorities. And so in this region, energy transition is an extremely important focus area for the governments. And so policies, first of all, I think policies that would help the work in supporting energy access with energy transition and climate resilience is definitely grid extension is not the main solution for energy access and transition of underserved communities. There should be a policy that also prioritizes distributed, decentralized energy systems, and that it has a role in a future energy system. It doesn't stop with rural electrification, but it also has a role in more advanced energy systems, such as in countries such as Germany and Spain, where you do have community energy and energy communities, right? Because these regulations are not well established in our region. So that policy first has to come from the narrative, and then I think, moving it away from grid extension to policies that will allow for distributed energy and local ownership and governance, and then regulations will follow. So
narratives, I think that's a very important point that you say. And I mean, we had at IRENA in the Community Energy Working Group, we had one white paper with best practice examples with stories told from around the world. So I also recommend that everyone who'd like to hear some really very different technologies, etc. But when we think of that angle, and now I'm asking again then Tich, I was a bit surprised in the previous session because there was someone from I think it was from ECOWAS, from the utilities, African utilities, that was really setting a very different narrative, which was kind of the opposite of what community energy is. From your perspective, how challenging is it? Because I assume that, speaking about Africa, some would say, we need now the big grids, we need big development, we need big utilities. And when you say, no, start with microgrids and start with the communities, some might say, but don't keep people like with these small nitty-gritty things. What's your answer to this? I mean, you're obviously focusing on this community, but energy approach. What's your, how do you explain that in your work?
I think that's a very interesting conversation, because I think the answer lies in the history of how the electricity sector itself has evolved. If I could give the example of South Africa, for example, initially when the first power generation plants were islanded, and they were linked to mines, and then mining towns then sprouted, and you then had a lot of islanded mini grids. I mean grids which were then interconnected into a national grid. And for the continent, if you look at the population density, it does not make sense to just concentrate on grid extension, because the population density in some of these sparsely populated areas, it doesn't justify constructing a transmission line. But rather, let's focus on establishing these energy communities, which as they grow and you start, as they grow, you can then be able to integrate them later on. So that will be the I think we need to start thinking about contextualizing our own development within the African context, so that we can come up with solutions that are applicable and relevant to our current circumstances. And I think what the other point that was mentioned by Mr. Taylor is that the focus has mainly been to say that let's give people access to electricity. Even when you look at the definition of access, if somebody has got a transmission line that's passes close to them, that is regarded as having access to electricity. But are they using that electricity? Can then afford to use that electricity? So these are the things that we then need to start thinking about. But I think for us, there are great opportunities that we can learn from, and so that we can then leapfrog and not repeat the mistakes that have been made in the past, and what that we have made in the past as well. Because if you can mirror the electricity sector to the telecom sector, the electricity sector has not achieved what the telecom sector has done in terms of giving universal access to telecommunications for the population, because perhaps we are using the different models that are really not working for us. The other problem that we have is that the single buyer model, and where you have power utilities that are not credit worthy. And if you then say that this uncredit worthy utility then has to be the single buyer, and obviously, it's very difficult to attract investment in the generation side of things. So we need to make sure that at least we've got some flexibility where, for example, these community energy systems, energy communities are allowed to sell their power to credit-worthy off-takers. If there's a mine close by, allow that community to sell directly to the mine. If, for example, we visited this the data center, which is next to adjacent to a power plant, are these things that we can think about, so that at least these energy communities have got a reliable anchor demand from say something like a data center. And these are the things that we need to start thinking as a continent, so that we can come up with solutions that allow us to rapidly find solutions that within the context of our social problems that we are faced with, and within our context as sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was, I think, a very important answer. And this, I think, enabling communities, that's a very important one. This, by the way, for Europe, the same. No? So it depends on the frameworks. Do you have some countries where there is an enabling framework and there's a lot of community energy, even in those maybe wealthy countries? In others, it doesn't work. Now, when we go, and now as looking at the time, I know we now need to be short. I would, to colleagues, like to final, and please try to be also short in your answers. Now it's disappeared. There was one question related to national utilities. And I think that's for Manoj Gupta, maybe that's an answer where you could contribute something, because you are in India, where you have a national grid on the one hand, but you also talk about places which are not yet connected. How do you see that relation between public but anyway, utilities, and then those mini grids that you are building?
So today, these utilities we in India call DISCOMs, distribution companies, who are empowered. I mean, they are obligated to supply electricity to all the customers within that range. Now, there is a challenge. As you said, national grid cannot reach to those remote areas, or cost of extending that network, reliability of that network is a challenge. So here it becomes a enabling factor by setting a microgrid or solar rooftop systems in that particular area, and then slowly increase the productive use of those energies. What we have seen in the certain areas when initial microgrid was set up, within a year's time, number of customers doubled, energy consumption started increasing. They become aspirational to use electrical equipments, which have probably not thought about TV system, home DTH systems. So there is a usage goes up. Now, typically in the village area, which is agri-based, you also have animal husbandry. The issue which we have seen that if they start using these two ecosystem for economic development activities, all other things fall into place. If the economic goal is not being achieved, other things will just be pushed through, but not being adopted. Now, on the financing part, what we have two methodology. One is like you were talking about, outcome-based financing, which clearly says whosoever set up will have a definite outcomes, and if it is achieved, you incentivize and probably give that more investment coming through. Other one is the investment on the end user customer. Like setting a microgrid is one aspect, but usage of that electricity by the end customer is another. So access to energy efficient equipments and assets are key drivers. There is a resistance of community to shift from traditional method to electrical systems. So in India, we have partnered with one of the bank, which has enabled green energy usage fund. So there is some incentive given to customers to utilize and deploy renewable energy. So for example, energy efficient motors, some incentive provided, and using this energy efficient motor, they have income generation opportunity. So I think with this methodology, it's a win-win game for community as well as utility. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's possible. It's obviously not everywhere like this. There's also sometimes competition. We know that. We're running out of time. That's why I think we don't have time to discuss this further, but thanks for this answer. And there's one question which I think maybe we can ask then from your Latin American perspective. The question is, are indigenous communities interested in being engaged in an energy community? Maybe you can broaden the answer a little bit, not only indigenous, which you might also have, but are those communities which you mentioned, those thousands of, is there an interest? Are they becoming proactive and also then kind of supporting what the government obviously wants?
So from my perspective and from my work on the ground with indigenous communities in Colombia, the answer is yes. I mean, we hear from indigenous people. We have been, you know, in the boundary of government assistance and not only assistance, but, you know, consistent programs, and also on the boundaries of development. You know, this seems to be a program for them that at least a solution for many of their needs. And I have an anecdote on that, but because, you know, the government has this energy community strategy, which the goal is 20,000, and they open up a registration form so that communities can nominate themselves to be part of the program and to receive funding for them. So more than 80,000 communities nominated themselves. And when talking to many of them, I was like, okay, but you nominated yourself, so how do you feel? And they were like, I heard that the government is giving solar panels to people, so why not? So it's like, there's more work to be done on you know, discussing this deeply. You know, what does it imply for you to be an energy community? Do you know that there is a planning stage, there is a maintenance, there is a potential decommissioning, there are gains of this? So more work on the governance of this system is needed. And I just wanted to say briefly one question you mentioned before. Time is gone, but policies that we need to be put in place to support energy communities. And we are supportive of the role of auctions, renewable energy auctions, to support energy communities. How do we do for countries to implement or include energy communities in these targets, right? Setting, for instance, a quota that is specially designed to these communities to participate, because you're not asking a local community to compete with big companies, right? It's not going to happen. But how do you define a rewarding mechanism? And we were discussing this before, for them to actively participate and see the benefits around it, right? So, yeah, another conversation perhaps, but I'll
what kind of session we'll do about auctions? We did a study about the impact on community energy in Germany of the auctions, and it was a disaster. It was just a nightmare. Yeah, I totally on your side, but at the end, I mean, I think that is kind of also summarizing. your statement, we need a narrative. I think that's probably the most important outcome of our discussion here, because it's been mentioned in kind of introduction here. It is the concept of community owning some facilities is not new, but bringing this into this energy debate, especially renewable energy debate, that's not there yet. We've been, of course, observing, some of us actively contributing to IRENA, the discussion. We see that there's also the debate is taking shape. And I think it's very good that this topic is part of it. And it's very important that all of you can report from your experience. I think that is what we need to continue doing, contributing to this international discussion, which otherwise only, of course, those international companies who can afford to come to such meetings would take place. So, and then under that, we need to discuss all these important topics. Which policies are good? What financial instruments are good? What's the role of training and education? What business models are working? But all this, I think, anyway, needs to be following the national context, cultural, etc. context. So I think that is, my perception, certainly a good outcome of this session. Let's continue our work. Let's continue your work. From my side, thank you very much for the work that all of you are doing. And thank you very much also for everybody who contributed here and joined us in this panel discussion. Thank you. And I think it's now time for me to hand over back to our mistress of ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I would invite some of the presenters to come and join for a group photo with the moderator and the panelists. And while the photo is going on, this is the end of our session. Please head directly back to the Kameha Universal for the last short session. Thank you.